From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. Agriculture is a big business. More than $1 trillion worth of agricultural products are traded internationally every year. But countries may put their own plants at risk when they import fruits, vegetables, wood, and other products. As products are unloaded from ships and planes, some unwelcome visitors may find a new home. The stink bug is one example. This pest eats fruit crops. It is believed to have arrived in the United States from China. Other pests include fruit fly eggs or fungal spores. Some well-known threats include wheat rust, African armyworms, cassava bacterial blight, and the European grapevine moth. The list goes on. To fight the problem, there are new standards under the International Plant Protection Convention. Craig Fedchock is the coordinator of the treaty. He says the purpose of the convention is to develop standards for the trade of plants and plant products. The convention was first approved in 1952. It is recognized as one of the 3 bodies that set standards for the World Trade Organization. New standards for pest risk analysis were released at the convention's annual meeting in Rome. These give greater guidance for deciding whether an imported plant might be a threat to cultivated or wild plants. Craig Fedchock says changes were also made to standards for wood packaging material. Wood packaging can carry pests like beetles that can harm native forests. Agricultural pests are believed to cause billions of dollars in damage each year. Getting an estimate is difficult. Countries may not want their trading partners to know the full extent of the problem. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. The slow food movement is growing in most of the Western world. The movement supports small, local farms. It works against huge farms led by international food and agriculture companies. But the slow food movement is not growing very quickly in Africa. So a group called Slow Food International has named a Ugandan man to help it grow. Eddie Mukibi will work to help people in Africa grow healthy food. Slow Food International plans to create 10,000 gardens throughout Africa. Many of the gardens will be in schools. Mr. Mukibi says he hopes they will teach young people about the importance of slow food. There is still knowledge about traditional crops and planting seasons in Africa. He hopes the garden project will reconnect young people to the land. Mr. Mukibi was a student of the crop planting science called agronomy. He discovered that crops being planted in Uganda were sometimes not right for the farming environment. He says he began to understand the importance local foods had to food security, but local foods were quickly disappearing. These traditional products, he says, are used to African conditions, including poor weather. Mr. Mukibi is trying to persuade political leaders and scientists to support the slow food movement. But he says it is hard. They support big industrial farms that can produce a lot of a single crop. But Mr. Mukibi argues that the problem in Africa is not a lack of food. It is that the food is not reaching enough people. He says people should be working to improve ways of sharing food resources. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report in Special English. People have been growing chrysanthemums for more than 2,000 years. Mums make bright and colorful gardens. People in China and other Asian cultures make tea with the flowers. Giacomo Puccini, the great Italian composer, even named one of his works after chrysanthemums, chrysanthemi. One basic kind of mum is the hardy or garden mum. The other basic kind is the florist mum. The garden mum is better able to handle different growing conditions. The decorative mum is often seen in gardens. Another popular type, the quill mum, has long, straight petals, like a tube or needle. Chrysanthemum blooms can be white, yellow, gold, red, or other colors. Many of the plants grow to 1 meter high. The soil for chrysanthemums should be kept moist, but well drained. Mums grow best in full sunlight. They produce colorful blooms when days get shorter and nights get longer. The life cycle of the plant depends on the amount of daylight. This is why experts advise against placing mums near night lights or street lights. The light may interfere with their normal growth cycle. As a result, the plants may develop buds too soon. In climates where temperatures fall below freezing, plant mums at least 6 weeks before the first frost is expected. That way the plants will be well established for cold weather. To get more blooms, pinch back the branches when new growth has reached 15 centimeters. Squeeze about 5 to 7 centimeters off each branch. Pinch it again when a branch grows another 12 to 15 centimeters. Stop the pinching about 100 days before you want the plants to bloom. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Scientists have made a genetic map of the tomato. Tomatoes are second only to potatoes as the world's most valuable vegetable crop. 8 years of work went into making the map or genome. 300 scientists around the world took part in the project to sequence the tomato's DNA code. Giovanni Giuliano, a researcher in Italy, is part of the Tomato Genome Consortium. He says they started as 10 countries and now have 14. Having the tomato's genetic map will help growers who are always trying to produce a better tomato. Mr. Giuliano says they now know not only what genes are there, but their order. Researchers published the genome of a tomato used by Heinz, the American food company, famous for its tomato ketchup. Ketchup is a thick sauce used on hamburgers, hot dogs, and other foods. Heinz's research manager, Rich Osmankowski, says the company knows what it wants in a tomato. Traits like sugars, and for Heinz, viscosity, or the juice thickness, and the redness of the tomatoes are all very critical traits for us, he says. Those are all controlled by a lot of different genes within the tomato. Mr. Osmankowski says genome sequencing takes away much of the guesswork for breeders of tomatoes or other crops that have been mapped. In his words, by having the genome information, we can pick out those tomato plants that have more of those genes. Until the late 1960s, the tomatoes that Heinz used to make ketchup often cracked open on the vine after a heavy rain. Heinz wanted to develop a variety that would resist that cracking. Breeders used the traditional methods of mating generations of different varieties. The tomatoes they were trying to develop not only had to resist cracking, they also had to resist disease. And they had to be easy to harvest mechanically. Finally, the company came up with the tomato it wanted, called the Heinz 1706. Mr. Osmankowski says the job would have been much easier if there had been a genetic map to follow. There were no genetic tools at the time. But the work today is not just about making better ketchup. Climate change may force many crops to adjust to new conditions. And Mr. Osmankowski says researchers are already using the new genetic tools to help fight new plant diseases. The researchers published the tomato genome in the journal Nature. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more news and information for people learning English, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Thanksgiving Day is America's version of a harvest festival. The holiday is celebrated on the fourth Thursday in November. Millions of Americans joined family and friends to give thanks and eat a meal with a history that is centuries old. Early European settlers in North America held other ceremonies where they gave thanks. But what Americans often consider the first Thanksgiving took place in Plymouth Colony. Today, we call it Massachusetts. Those settlers are known as the Pilgrims. They held a 3-day celebration in the fall of 1621. They celebrated the harvest with members of a local Indian tribe. The best-known food that Americans traditionally eat on Thanksgiving is turkey. The nation's turkey producers are expected to raise 242 million birds this year. The government says that is 2% fewer than last year. Last year's turkey production had a value of about $3.5 billion. Thanksgiving turkeys are traditionally served with a bread mixture that some Americans call stuffing. Others call it dressing. Side dishes include cranberries, sweet potatoes, and green beans or other vegetables. The meal traditionally ends with a dessert of pumpkin pie or pecan pie. Some Thanksgiving foods have changed over time. For example, most turkeys these days are bred with larger breasts to provide more white meat. Corn, known in much of the world as maize, has also changed. It tastes much sweeter than the starchier corn of the past. The way Americans prepare for Thanksgiving has also changed. Economist John Anderson of the American Farm Bureau Federation says some people look for ways to save time. He says shortcuts, like buying prepared foods for the holiday, are part of a bigger trend in America. Some people might not have the time or the desire to prepare a big meal, or the space for a lot of guests. Whatever the reason, John Anderson notes that more people go to a restaurant for Thanksgiving dinner than in the past. Aid groups and religious organizations were also busy serving Thanksgiving meals to the needy. The weak economy has increased the number of Americans receiving government assistance to buy food. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Our programs are online with transcripts and MP3 files at voaspecialenglish.com. And you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at VOA Learning English. From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. Companion planting is the idea that some kinds of plants can help each other grow. Plants that are compatible generally need similar soil, nutrients, and moisture levels. Advice about which plants are compatible is sometimes based more on tradition than fact. But experts say there is evidence to support certain combinations. These can improve harvests, reduce disease, and help control pests by attracting helpful insects. For example, some kinds of soil bacteria take nitrogen from the air and make it into a form that plants can use. The plants hold or fix the nitrogen in their roots. Legumes are especially good at nitrogen fixing. Then, any crops that share the same space as the legumes can get the nitrogen as the roots decompose. Beans and potatoes can also share territory well because their roots reach different levels in the soil. Deep-rooted vegetables get nutrients and moisture from lower down in the soil, so they do not compete with plants with shallower roots. But some plants placed together can harm each other's development. For example, tomatoes do not like wet soil, but watercress does, so you would probably want to keep them separated. Some kinds of produce should be kept apart even after being harvested. This is because of ethylene gas. Ethylene is a plant hormone that can cause some kinds of produce to ripen too quickly. This risk of ripening too soon is why markets often separate high ethylene producing foods from those that are sensitive to the gas. But if you put an apple in a bag with a green banana, the ethylene from the apple will make the banana ripen sooner. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report in Special English. Tall or short, fat or thin, natural, plastic, or metal. Whatever the choice, the National Christmas Tree Association says Americans bought over 40 million Christmas trees last year. Christmas trees are grown and harvested in all 50 states. Christmas time in the city usually means buying trees already cut and waiting to be sold. But some people like to drive to tree farms. Others wait for their tree to come to them, or they order one from the pages of a catalog, or even on the internet. Some say the easiest thing of all is to buy an artificial tree with Christmas lights already on it. The National Christmas Tree Association represents growers and sellers of most of the farm-raised Christmas trees in the United States. The group estimates that 9.5 million artificial trees were sold in 2011 compared to almost 31 million natural ones. So people still enjoy the appearance and smell of natural trees more. The group says people paid an average of around $35 for a natural Christmas tree and twice as much for an artificial one. But artificial trees, which mostly come from China, can be reused for years. Most natural trees are cut up and recycled, but some people buy trees that can be planted. The association says 16% of people who bought natural trees last year chose them at a farm and cut the tree themselves. 84% bought them already cut. Most Christmas trees are now grown on farms instead of in forests. The trees take 6 to 10 years to grow. In some states, less than half the planted trees survive the weather conditions to become someone's Christmas tree. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. An evergreen tree is a Christmas tradition in many American homes. The tree is usually a pine or fir, dressed with lights and other colorful decorations. Families might buy a cut tree or go to a tree farm and cut one down themselves. Some people bring a live tree in a pot into their home for the holidays and then put it back outdoors. Some people rent a Christmas tree. Companies might bring the same live tree to the same family year after year. Or the tree might get planted in a park or someplace else where it could help the environment. There are some trees that can be reused year after year because they are made of plastic or metal. Another popular evergreen this time of year is the mistletoe plant. It has small white berries and leaves that feel like leather. The traditional Christmas mistletoe is native to Europe. Ancient Druids believed mistletoe had magical powers. The plant can be found growing on apple trees, lindens, maples, and poplars. Mistletoe is a parasitic plant. It connects itself to a tree and steals nutrients and water. Today, Mistletoe is best known as an excuse to steal a kiss at a Christmas party. Kissing is a tradition if two people stand under mistletoe hung in a doorway. Another plant that many people connect with Christmas is the poinsettia. Poinsettias are native to Mexico. They can be white or pink, but most are bright red. They are named after the first American ambassador to Mexico. Joel Poinsett liked them enough to send some back to the United States. Babies or pets that chew on poinsettias might get sick. But experts say the plant is not as poisonous as some people think. Like millions of other houses, the home of America's first president was decorated for Christmas. George Washington's Mount Vernon estate is in Virginia. Visitors heard stories about what Christmas was like at Mount Vernon in the 18th century. The museum, where visitors began their tour, was decorated with Christmas trees. Yet Mount Vernon would not have had Christmas trees during the late 1700s when Washington led the country. They did not become popular in the United States until the 1800s. Visitors learned that in Washington's time, there was greenery inside the mansion, but that was probably the extent of the decorations. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Organic farming avoids the use of chemical pesticides and man-made fertilizers. Supporters say organic farming is better for the environment than other methods. But studies have shown that organic farming often produces less food per hectare. That lower yield means feeding the world organically would require more land. But good farmland is limited, and scientists say deforestation from the clearing of land for agriculture is already a problem for climate change. In a new study, researchers wanted to measure the difference between conventional and organic yields. So they combined the results of 66 earlier studies. They found that some organic farms can yield almost as much as conventional farms, but most cannot. The findings were reported in the journal Nature. The study's lead author was Verena Seifert of McGill University in Canada. She says conventional farms usually have higher yields than organic ones. But some activities, environmental conditions, and even crops can narrow the differences. On average, organic farms produced 25% less compared to conventional farms. But yields of organic fruits and other perennial crops nearly equaled the yields from conventional ones. So did the yields of legumes such as soybeans. Legumes produce some of their own nitrogen fertilizer. However, organic vegetables and cereal crops had a lot lower yields compared to conventionally grown crops. Ms. Seifert says the soil on organic farms holds water better, and that can reduce the yield difference. Also, organic farmers can improve their yields by making sure crops get enough fertilizer. But increasing the nitrogen is harder to do organically using just animal waste and crop rotations. Organic farmers rotate food crops with plants that fertilize the soil. But while these cover or fertilizer crops are growing, food crops have to be grown on other land. And if farmers use manure, they have to feed the animals that produce it. And that requires grazing land or cropland. The United Nations says world demand for food will grow 70% by the middle of the century. John Reganold is a scientist at Washington State University. He says no one should dismiss organic agriculture as part of the solution. He says farming is increasingly a mix of organic and conventional methods. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. A listener in Nigeria asked us to talk about the Moringa oleifera plant. This tree or shrub is grown for food and other purposes. Jerry Moore is a plant expert with the United States Department of Agriculture. He says the plant is high in protein and rich in vitamins and minerals. Not only the fruit, but also the leaves, roots, and seeds can be used as food in some way. The plant is known by different names around the world. Moringa oleifera is native to the foothills of the Himalayas, from Pakistan to eastern India. Because it is native to that area, much of the research on the plant has been done by scientists in Pakistan and India. Its native range is narrow, but the plant is grown throughout the world. In the United States, it has been introduced in Hawaii, Florida, and Puerto Rico. Jerry Moore says the plant cannot grow where there is freezing weather. It resists heat up to 49 degrees Celsius. The plant also can withstand dry or wet conditions, so it can grow in many areas. Mr. Moore says the plant can be used to make many different foods. The leaves can be boiled and eaten in curry dishes. The fruit can be sliced and eaten, cooked, or pickled. Jerry Moore says the taste is similar to asparagus. The roots of the plant can be dug up, peeled, and used as a seasoning in the same way as horseradish. Moringa oleifera is related to mustard, so it can have a sharp taste. The seeds in the fruit can be fried and taste like peanuts. The seeds are rich in oil, but the bark of the Moringa oleifera tree can be poisonous, so be sure to remove it. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.